2022 South African Rally Raid Championship continued with a double-header in the heart of the Free State's farming community. The town of Bothaville, and more specifically the famous Nampo showgrounds between Bothaville and Orkney, played host to rounds 4 and 5 of the championship, the Nampo 400. All the hot, windy and dusty action from the Free State is proudly brought to you by Toyota, Ford, Gulfstream and Pirelli. The town of Bothaville is slap bang in the middle of the Free State's farming district. This is Mielievereld, but the fields have been already harvested for 2022, and while the area awaits the first rains of summer, the South African Rally Raid Championship took the opportunity to host 2 full rounds of the 2022 title fight near Bothaville, or the more famous Nampo showgrounds to the north of the town to be more specific. For 2022, the race coincided with Nampo Alpha, a smaller but similar show and exhibition to the famous Nampo Harvest Day, giving showgoers the opportunity to experience hardcore cross-country racing up close and personal. The route covered almost the entire area between the towns of Bothaville and Orkney on the banks of the Vaal River. As in previous years, the route was once again a challenging one, taking in a mix of tight and twisty sections as well as fast and wide open tracks. Challenging indeed, but also a firm favourite with many of the drivers. But before we get into the details of the race, let's take a quick look at the championship standings after 3 rounds of the 2022 SARRC. In Class A of the special vehicle title fight, it was Tim Howes with a fairly comfortable 30-point advantage over his nearest rival, Louis de Prieur, with fellow Italian Trace Price-Moore a further 6 points adrift. Quinton Lessing was in command of Class P. Jeff Minott had a lead of just 1 single point over Werner Mostert in the Class Gs. Over in the production category, Jaden Els was still at the top of the Class T charts, with Christo Rose in second and Johan van Staden in third. Class T 1.2 saw a tie at the top with both Brian Baragwanath and Lance Trethewey on 65 points each. Class T1 has seen no less than 16 different drivers all score points so far in 2022. With the impressive Eben Besson topping the leaderboard on 102 points, 24 points clear of Daniel Schroeder with Philip Buerta in third. And finally, onto what is regarded as the premier Class T1+, where it was an all TGR-SA affair at the top of the standings, with Neil de Villiers leading his teammates, Guy Bottrell and Shamir Variawa. So that's how the numbers stacked up after 3 rounds of the 7-round championship. Over at Nampo, the crews were getting ready to take on the Pirelli qualifying race, a very short route on the outskirts of the Nampo Park to determine the starting order for the main event. But before they dropped the hammer, we caught up with some of the main players across the various classes. Jeff Minott's championship lead in Class G was a narrow one, just 1 point to be precise.
You know what? Ahead is ahead, so we're okay with that.
Tim Howes seemed to have it all under control so far in 2022 at the top of the Class A standings.
We can just keep it consistent. I think we'll be in the points and hopefully keep ahead in the championship.
In the production vehicle category, youngster Jaden Els was doing a sterling job in only his first full season in Class T.
So we're here to have fun, first of all, and then we're going to give it our all out there.
Class T 1.2 is brand new for 2022 and tailor-made for these Century Racing CR6 2-wheel drive buggies. Coming into round 4, we had a tie at the top of the standings with Lance Trethewey and Brian Baragwanath on 65 points each, with Baragwanath deciding to sit this one out.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's the reason for that. Still a long way to go to the end of the year.
This is only his second full year in the ultra-competitive sport of cross-country racing, but even so, Eben Besson is quickly making a name for himself at the top of the Class T1 standings.
So looking forward for this race. Yes, we are leading the championship at the moment, but we must just build from there on.
Chances are that the overall winner of this race will be from behind the wheel of a Class T1 Plus monster, as has been the case at each round so far. Lance Woolridge had every intention to fly the flag for Ford in Bothaville.
We've done a lot of work on the car, very, very confident in it. So, yeah, we're just going to go have a good, clean race.
But this is the man at the top of the championship standings.
Obviously we're in a good position and hopefully we can have a good race. Car's feeling good, so yeah, we'll give it a good shot today and tomorrow as well and see where we finish.
As with any other race, the starting order for the Nampo 400 was determined by a qualifying race sponsored by Pirelli. At only 8 kilometers, it didn't provide much opportunity to gain much of an advantage over the rest of the field, but also at only 8 kilometers, it also meant that there was no room for error. At 7:30 on the Friday, the flag was waved to signal the official start of the Nampo 400, round 4 of the 2022 South African Rally Raid Championship. With lots to gain and even more to lose, the qualifying turned into a full sprint race. Cars were set off in 1-minute intervals, and soon after, the Free State fields were filled with the noise and dust of SA's fastest off-road racers. It didn't take long for the front runners to stop the clock just a few minutes after setting off, although for some it took a little longer. Toyota Gazoo Racing SA's Shamir Variawa and Donnie Stassen made a small navigational error that cost them around half a minute, and half a minute on such a short section meant that Variawa, who would normally be right near the top, dropped way down the order. His teammates Guy Bottrell and Simon Vasey-Lyle did a great job by completing the course in a time of 5 minutes and 29 seconds, good enough for 4th overall. The NWM Ford Castrol Ranger of Lance Woolridge and Alvin Vonk went 3 seconds faster than Bottrell, but so did TGRSA's Janelle de Villiers and Dennis Murphy, both cars stopping the clock at 5 minutes and 26 seconds. It was fast, but only fast enough to tie for second place. This meant that defending SA champions Henk Ladergan and Brett Cummings made their intentions very clear early on in Boerteville. Ladergan blitzed the field in a time of 5 minutes and 19 seconds to take pole position and an early run on the event. The top 4 were of course all in the Class T1 Plus cars. 5th overall, but leading the Class T1.2s was the JCP Steel Supplies CR6 of Ernst Robertson and Henry Kerner, who managed to edge out points leaders Trethui and Leonard Kramer in the King Price Extreme version of the same car by a comfortable 10 seconds. With Dierwald van Breda and Adrian Roots rounding out the Class T1.2 qualifying podium. 6th fastest overall and the first of the Class T1 Buckies was none other than the veteran racer Chris Visser and Albertus Blickies Venter in the red-lined Revo. Visser's time was 5 minutes and 32 seconds, which young Richard Leek and Zahir Badania managed to equal from behind the wheel of their Leek Motorsport race car. A great performance by the youngster. Times were close though, with German driver Daniel Schroeder and Navi Ryan Bland just a further 3 seconds adrift in the Nissan Navara, with the Blicknort brothers in their Team Rally Raid Hilux a further second back in only their 3rd ever race. Teammates and championship points leaders Eben Besson and Leander Pinar were on course to fight for a podium in the short qualifying race, but like Variawa early on, Besson too made a navigational error that saw them lose at least half a minute. Youngster Jaden Els made his intentions clear during the morning's round of interviews, but he didn't have a clean run, allowing the wily old Johan van Staden and his son Sean to take the Class T pole position in their KEC Racing Renault Duster. The Van Stadens beat Hendrik and Heinrich Duplessis in their Ford by 5 seconds, with the King Price Extreme Duster of Els and Armand de Toy a further 1 second adrift. As the points leader in Class A of the special vehicle category, Tim Howes was the man with a target on his back, and after the short qualifying race, it was Louis Deprea and Chris Visser Jr. who landed the first punch by claiming pole position in their Farmers Meet Striker by beating Howes by 16 seconds. These were early days, but the times were extremely close, especially in Class G, where just 8 seconds separated the top 3 qualifiers. Werner and Ian Mostert in their Motonetics Racing Can-Am set the 3rd fastest time, just 2 seconds slower than the defending champions in the form of the Lani brothers, Cecil and Aladis. But the man who has also accumulated the most points so far this season was eager to continue his good run of form. Jeff, in it to win it minute, with Gerrit Snyman reading the notes, set the fastest time in the qualifying race in their hydropower equipment Can-Am. And there's proof of minutes Pirelli qualifying race victory over the Lani brothers and the Mosterts. Deprea won Class A ahead of Tim Howes and Trace Price-Moore, with Quinton Lessing and Noel Acton the only ones competing in Class P. The Van Stadens were the fastest in Class T ahead of the Duplessis, with Els rounding out the qualifying podium. The Class T1 scoreboard is a full one that saw the names of Chris Visser at the top ahead of Richard Leek and Daniel Schroeder. There was no Brian Baragwanath on the T1.2 results sheet. Instead, the results showed the name of Dewald van Breda in third, just a few seconds behind joint points leader Lance Trathui. But it was a blistering performance from Ernst Roberts that earned him the top spot in qualifying. Fastest of all, however, was the TGRSA duo of Henk Latergan and Brett Cummings, who beat their teammates De Villiers and Murphy by a full 7 seconds. The Ford of Lance Woolridge and Alvin Vonk set the exact same time. But this was only the Pirelli qualifying race, and already we saw loads of action, which boded well for the race proper. So join us after the break for the rest of the remainder of the Nampo 400, round 4 of the 2022 South African Rally Raid Championship. Welcome back to the Free State town of Bothaville, or more specifically the famous Nampo showgrounds for the Nampo 400 race, round 4 of the 2022 South African Rally Raid Championship. We've just seen a very short qualifying race, but the real event was about to start. On the cards for the day, 2 identical loops through the farmlands between Bothaville and the town of Orkney on the banks of the Vaal River. Each loop would consist of around 170 kilometers, and with a mix of fast and flowing sections combined with slower and more technical parts, the crews were facing a real challenge. It has now become the norm for the top 10 qualifiers to choose their starting positions in reverse order for the race proper, effectively giving the fastest qualifier the final choice. On this occasion, Henk Latergan took a gamble and chose to start the race from 10th on the road, while the 2 Fords of the Woolridge brothers ended up first and second. The Toyotas of De Villiers and Bottrell were happy in 3rd and 4th respectively, with Chris Visser in 5th and well placed to keep an eye on the proceedings. At 9:30 on the Saturday morning, Gareth Woolridge dropped the clutch of his NWM Ford Castrol Ranger to start the Nampo 400. Exactly 2 minutes later, brother Lance did the same in the second Ford, followed by the 2 Toyota Gazoo Racing Hiluxes of Janelle De Villiers and Guy Bottrell. Behind the leading few Class T1 Plus cars, a string of cars in various classes also got their respective races underway, including the Redline Revo of Chris Visser and Blikkies Venter in the Class T1s, the Class T1.2 Century CR6 of Ernst Roberts and Henry Kerner, and the T1 Nissan Navara, with German driver Daniel Schroeder behind the wheel. Next up, the Leek Motorsport car driven by Richard Leek Jr. and Zahir Vidania, and the first of the open wheelers in the form of the Farmers Meat Striker of Louis Dupree and Chris Visser Jr. But what about Henk Latergan and Brett Cummings, who started all the way down in 10th? Latergan knew that he would run into dust quite early on, but it was the champion's strategy to try and pass a number of the slower cars as quickly as possible and then set his sights on his main rivals. For now, he was losing time in the dust. Behind Latergan, another 30 or more race cars in the 7 different classes that make up Rally Raid Racing tackled the demanding route of the Nampo 400. Back at the front, it was time to cast our attention to the race that was developing between the leaders, a race that posed several questions. We all know that Henk Latergan is as fast as lightning, but he was sitting in a fair amount of dust. And would the Fords be able to stay at the front, or would the Toyotas of De Villiers and Bottrell be able to upset the apple cart? At around 100 kilometers into the race, we started to get some of those answers. Latergan may have lost a few seconds fighting his way through the pack, but the man's overall speed was such that he still managed to extend his overall lead despite having to pass a few drivers. It was still early days, but it was already turning into a good race for the Toyota squad, with Guy Bottrell overtaking teammate Janelle De Villiers for the provisional 2nd and 3rd place respectively. Gareth Woolridge in his NWM Castrol Ford Ranger was losing a bit of time while opening up the road as one would expect, and slid down to 4th fastest overall at the halfway marker, whilst brother Lance also slid down due to technical issues on his machine. More on how it ended for the guys in the faster classes a little later on, but for now let's take a look at what went down for the other 40-odd crews in the various classes who contested the Nampo 400. Cars in Class G might be the smallest physically, but the battles are epic, and the Nampo 400 fight was no exception. Unfortunately for the defending champions, the Lani brothers, they would not take part in the battle as a 10-hour penalty dropped them to the back of the field. Justin Rutherford and Father Archie stopped the Nampo 400 clock at 5 hours, 54 minutes and 10 seconds after 400 kilometers of racing. Good enough to record a 5th place finish, but they were some distance behind eventual 4th place finishers Peter Walter and ace navigator Pierre Jourdan. The fight for Class G podium positions was getting close. Walter's time was less than 4 minutes away from claiming a podium position. But the final podium placing here at Nampo belonged to none other than Francois de Witt and Ewald van Rensburg in just their second ever outing since taking up National Rally Raid Racing. By now, it was easy to work out that the race for the Nampo 400 honours was also between the same two crews involved in the championship fight thus far. On one hand, you had former champions the Mostards in the form of Werner and Ian Mostert in their Motornetics Can-Am, and on the other hand, you had the championship hopefuls Jeff Minott and Gerrit Snyman in their hydropower equipment, same version of the car. The Mostards threw caution to the wind, but on this occasion, there was nothing they could do to prevent Minott and Snyman from storming to yet another victory. Jeff, in it to win it Minott, took 4 hours and 50 minutes to be exact to take the Nampo 400 win, a comfortable 23 minutes ahead of the Mostards. The man was clearly happy with his weekend so far.
We won the first loop and we won overall for the day, so it was absolutely fantastic.
These big-wheeled and powerful monsters in Class A are the pinnacle of the category for so-called special vehicles, and as has become the norm so far in 2022, the Nampo 400 once again turned into a three-way battle between Loert de Prieur and Chris Visser Jr., Tim Howes and Gary Campbell, and fellow Italians Trace Price-Moore and Sean Braithwaite. The Farmers' Meat striker of Loert de Prieur and Visser put in a valiant effort, but they had no choice but to settle for third place behind the two racing bats ahead of them. When the flag was waved to signal the end of the 400-kilometre long race, it was Tim Howes and Gary Campbell who recorded their third consecutive victory in Class A, beating Trace Price-Moore by less than 3 minutes in the end, but more than enough to extend their overall championship lead.
We feel fortunate actually because we all had our issues out there, and I think we just had less issues than everyone else, so just fortunate to get to the finish.
And this is what it was all about, the opportunity to taste the sweet taste of success from the winner's podium. Class G saw a first podium for de Witt and Van Rensburg in third, behind the Mostards in second. But with a fine victory here in Nampo, Minott edges ahead on the overall point standings. And Tim Howes and Gary Campbell are starting to make a bit of a habit of standing on the top step of Class A, with Trace Price-Moore and Braithwaite in second, and de Prieur and Visser rounding out the Class A podium. And here's proof of House's 2 minute and 43 second victory over Price-Moore in Class A. There were no finishes in Class P, whilst the Class G scoreboard showed a comfortable victory margin for Minott over the Mostards. So that's how things turned out for the crews in the special vehicle category here at the Nampo 400, but what about the majority of the cars in the production vehicle contest? Class T is for race cars with solid rear axles and currently the home of a few Fords and the Renault Dusters of youngster Jaden Els and the wily old fox Johan van Staden. There were 4 cars in the class, but only space for 3 on the podium, and the ones who missed out on the podium spot were in the NWM Ford Ranger of Christo Rose and Arno Olivier, who took 4 hours and 46 minutes to complete the race. It was fast, but not fast enough, as Hendrik and Heinrich Duplessis stopped their clock 3.5 minutes earlier to claim third in Class T. This meant that the fight for class honours was once again a tough one between the experienced Van Staden with his son Sean reading the notes and up-and-coming star Jaden Els with Armand de Toy in the Navi seat. The Van Stadens in the KEC Racing Renault Duster put up a great fight, but on this occasion the youth of Els trumped the experience of Van Staden, with Els coming out on top. The youngster, who just turned 18, already has a long list of motorsport achievements, including international go-kart victories, a successful stint in circuit racing, and now a healthy championship lead in Class T of the SA Rally Raid Championship.
I've done it since I was 7 and it's my ultimate dream. I've grown up with these guys and watching them, so for me it's a dream come true.
Hold on to your seats, folks, because we still had 3 classes to go, as well as the little question of who was going to win the overall race. So let's start with the 2-wheel drive buggies of the Century Racing CR6s in Class T 1.2. Regular winner and co-championship points leader Brian Baragwanath opted not to take part in the Nampo 400, opening the door for the big dog Lance Trathui to romp to a comfortable victory, or so everyone thought. The big man and his co-driver Lennon Kramer did stop the clock in a time of 4 hours and 24 minutes, the fastest of all the cars in class, but the King Price Extreme CR6 was docked a 20-minute penalty for a speeding infringement, dropping them from 1st to 3rd in standings. Pole setters Ernst Roberts and Henry Kerner in the JCP Steel Supplies CR6 experienced problems with their tyre inflation system. dropping them to 4th on the standings, just ahead of the unique Hilux Turbo driven by Simon Murray and Akim Bergman, who rounded out the class. So with Trethewey dropping down to 3rd, the fight for class honours turned into a duel between Dierwald van Breda and Adrian Roots, and the second JCP Steel Supply CR6 driven by father and son Malcolm and Frans Koch. It was a spectacular fight to say the least, but in the end, the Kochs are clearly enjoying the new challenge in their car after swapping a Ranger for the CR6 earlier this season. The Vryburg businessman drove a superb race to claim his first ever victory in this hotly contested class.
Mis voorbeelde daar verbid, maar jy moet iets hê, of 'n 4-wiel of 'n 2-wiel. So nee, ons het dit baie geniet. Dit was baie lekker.
And on to the busiest of the classes, Class T1, where no less than 12 cars took the starters' orders. And after enjoying a good run early on, the Redline Motorsport VK56 of Johan de Bruin and Gerrit Skitter experienced all sorts of setbacks on their way to be classified as the last finishers in the class. They were beaten by Dubai-based businessman Tommy Bell and local lad Wade Harris in their Redline Revo. In fact, there was a string of Redline Motorsport cars in this field, as the next 2 positions were also filled by them. Philip Buerter and Roelof Janssen van Vuren reached the end 9th in class, less than 2 minutes behind the VK50 version driven by Nick Pienaar and Carl Swanepoel. German driver Jürgen Schroeder and Stuart Gregory recorded yet another strong finish in their Nissan Navara, but were beaten to the line by young Richard Leek and Zahir Badanya. We were now nearing the sharp end of the Class T field, where mere minutes could be the difference between 1st and 5th. And on this occasion, 5th belonged to the Blicknor brothers from Witbank. It was only their 3rd ever race in their Team Rally Raid Hilux, and these guys have already shown that they clearly have some skill behind the wheel, and they will be ones to watch for the future. And speaking of skills, someone with skills in abundance is German driver Daniel Schroeder, who is getting faster and faster with every outing. Together with Ryan Bland reading the notes, the Nissan Navara squad raced to a fine 4th place finish, just missing out on a podium spot. And we mean just. The difference between Daniel Schroeder's 4th and the Hilux of Gary Berthold and Jean Moore in 3rd was a mere 25 seconds in the end. Berthold has had his fair share of bad luck in recent years, but the experienced campaigner came through to claim a podium spot in a very competitive field. And this is how competitive it was. Berthold missed out on a 2nd place finish by just 64 seconds, while only a further 30 seconds separated 2nd place from the crew who ended up winning the race. The protagonists, wily old fox Chris Visser and Blikkies Venter, and the new kid on the block, Eben Besson, with Leander Pienaar in the hot seat. Visser is a veteran of the sport and a former multiple champion, whilst Besson is only in his 2nd year, but the guy is fast. What followed was a great race between Besson and Chris, as he's now called by his rivals. Chris had the upper hand for most of the race, but the Redline Revo suffered a puncher near the end, handing victory to the hard-charging Team Rally Raid Hilux of Besson and Pienaar.
And yeah, awesome. I think end of the day it went well and we're happy for that. So let's keep on building to the end of the year.
And that was that for Class T1, but what about the new Premier Class T1 Plus and the fight for the overall victory between a number of Toyotas and the 2 Ford Rangers of the Woolridge brothers? Well, the day started well for Lance Woolridge and Alvin Vonk when they qualified in tied 2nd position, but the NWM Ford Castrol Ranger developed a few niggles which forced them down the leaderboard and an eventual 7th place finish in class. TGRSA members Shamir Variawa and Donnie Stassen started the day way down the order after a costly mistake during qualifying. The pairing recovered well and moved up the leaderboard, but they lost drive to the front wheels during the 2nd loop of the day's racing, dropping them down to a 6th place finish. They finished the race just over a minute behind the Team Rally Raid Hilux of the Malalan brothers Johan and Werner Horn, who did an amazing job to make it to the finish in 5th, considering the duo rolled their Hilux during the morning's qualifying run. Someone who had every intention to stand on the podium was the NWM Ford Castrol pairing of Gareth Woolridge and Boyd Dreyer. Woolridge Jr. had the task of opening the road earlier on in the morning, which probably cost him some valuable seconds, and despite having a fairly clean run for the rest of the day, he could not do much to influence the podium positions. In the end, it was mighty close, as the gap between Woolridge and 4th and the TGRSA Hilux of Janelle de Villiers and Dennis Murphy was a mere 17 seconds, that after 400 kilometers of racing. De Villiers reported a few incidents along the way, and although the experienced campaigner would have preferred to fight for the overall victory, you'll never find him too far from the top of the podium. With De Villiers ending in 3rd, it meant that the fight for the overall win was one between TGRSA teammates Henk Laudachan and Brett Cummings, and Guy Bottrell and Simon Vasey Lyle. Bottrell is impressing more and more with every outing since adding this sport to his repertoire, but in the end, it wasn't too much of a fight for first, as the defending champions, Lotachan and Cummings, were pretty much in a class of their own. Lotachan fought his way through the field and dust to record a race time of just 4 hours and 14 minutes and 17 seconds, nearly 2 minutes faster than anyone else. An emphatic victory for the champion and one that puts them right back in the hunt for another title. He was pleased, to say the least.
Really good day in the car. The car ran faultlessly. Brett did an amazing job on the navigation, so really happy.
And these are the final results for the competitors in the production vehicle category. Young Jaden Els extended his points lead with another victory in Class T over the Van Stadens, whilst the Cox recorded a maiden victory in Class T 1.2 over Van Breda and championship leader Trothui. Class T1 saw a great scrap between Besson and Visser, with Besson claiming the top step, and an all-red podium in Class T1 Plus, with Lotachan leading a Toyota 1-2-3, with teammates Bottrell and de Villiers in second and third. Time to celebrate victory in Bottrell at the Nampo 400, round 4 of the 2022 SARRC. Next up on the 2022 South African Rally Raid Championship calendar, we have round 5, which took place the very next day at the same venue. See you next week for the second Nampo 400 in as many days. All the slip sliding action was brought to you by Ford, Toyota, Gulfstream and Pirelli.